Would like to call this meeting to order. Ms. Bell, could we have roll call, please?
Ms. Fowler,
Present.
Mr. Lane,
Here.
Dr. Roberts,
Present.
Ms. D. Jones,
Present.
Ms. Vowell. Ms. Vowell,
A little trouble hearing you. I am present.
Ms. S. Jones. Present. Ms. Rhodey Collins.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll say the pledge. So my apologies for the late start tonight. As you know, 2020 is full of technical glitches, and that is what we are currently working through. I would like to start this meeting with a review of the November consent agenda. Are there any comments or questions on that? It is in your folder. So this is relatively short, so we'll go through them quickly. So if you have one, please let me know. Any questions on item 1, which is a contract with IXL? Item 2, it's an agreement with BJC School Outreach and Youth Development for the Frable Green Schoolyards project. Item 3, an MOU with WashU as it pertains to CSMB. Item 4 is an MOU with the Missouri Department of Social Services and Jobs for American Graduates. Item 5, contract with CT3 for CPN and 2 other schools. Item 6, to approve the fall routes for the fiscal year 2021 school year. Item 7, contract with K-12 for the Let's Talk platform. Item 8 is an MOU for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater St. Louis. Item 9, contract with Robert O'Boyle as it pertains to media buying services. Item 10, contract with MSBA and third-party Medicaid claiming management of direct therapy services. Item 11 is an MOU with St. Louis Alliance for Period Supplies. And item 12 is to approve the acceptance of funds from Parsons Blewett for teacher certification programs. Any questions on the consent agenda as a whole? Dr. Adams.
Good evening to the board and the public at this point in time. The president requested Dr. Maureen Clancy May, who is the representative for the St. Louis region, to provide an update to the Missouri Department of Education Comprehensive School Improvement Plan. So this is a presentation by Dr. Clancy May. I'd like to quickly kind of cover the agenda. The intent tonight is to do a MSIP overview. MSIP to CSIP, which is the Comprehensive School Improvement Plan overview, showing the link between the two, MSIP timeline, the concept of the school improvement plan, developing a school improvement plan, the process that is done to do that, the school improvement plan and the transformational plan, which is the district strategic plan, crosswalk to show how they're linked together, the CSIP alignment to SIP. I will cover progress monitoring, and we will both take any kind of questions that the board might have relative to the presentation tonight. So without further ado, Dr. Clancy May could not be present. The state has not allowed them to travel at this point in time, and so she will be coming by audio to do a presentation for the board, and you have a copy of that presentation in your packet. You received one earlier through email. that presentation has been updated. So if you look in your packet, there's an updated presentation, not the one that you were electronically provided, but several of the slides have been changed or updated, especially at the end of the presentation. You'll find the same thing for the presentation on consolidation. Those were drafts. I indicated that in the email that there will likely be some changes and some minor changes in both of those presentations before you at this point in time. So without further ado, I'll open it up and allow Dr. Clancy May, who will start with slide 3. And the slide that is in your packet is numbered, and so you can see and follow through it that way. Dr. Clancy May, you may start at this one. I think it might be in the board's best interest and the public as well for me to do the presentation on consolidation and then come back to this one once we are able to work out the glitches. Let me walk over and get my packet and we can start.
My apologies for not being with you in person. Unfortunately, we have a travel ban, so I am delighted to join you the best way virtually. And you can go to the next slide.
Okay. If I do it much louder, we'll get feedback, but I'll try.
Okay.
Maureen, go ahead.
If you could move to the next slide, please. Can you move to the next slide?
Just give us a second. She's trying to do it now.
So I'm here tonight to co-present on MSIP 5, and more importantly, the question I was asked initially was comprehensive school improvement plan. But I think it's important that you all have some context. So if you'll bear with me, I will just do a quick highlight of the history of MSIP 5, what it is, and how it's related to the comprehensive school improvement plan, or in your case, the transformation plan. MSIP 5 is the 5th iteration of the Missouri School Improvement Program, which began actually in 1990. It outlined the expectations for student achievement, and it has really been our guidepost for how we support schools and districts moving forward in their work toward continuous improvement and helping students achieve high quality standards that will help them face college and career success. MSIP 5 is our system to distinguish schools, their performance in schools that need improvement so that they can receive the support and assistance, but also it's an opportunity for the state to recognize high performing and accredited school districts as models of excellence. A word that you're hearing, that you'll hear most often is the annual performance report, the APR we call for short. And that is the mechanism by which we use our performance standards for accreditation purposes at the district level. So MSIP 5 contains both resource and process standards, which are qualitative in nature, but it's the performance standards that you'll hear most often talked about, and that's the quantitative data that we get from student assessments. Next slide, please. So districts can use the MSIP, the APR scores, if you will, to plan and to determine where the district stands in not only the support of Missouri schools, but in their own goals setting. From the MSIP, then we use the CSIP, which is the actual tool that a district can utilize to prioritize improvement needs. And in our case, we often will support and acknowledge that schools can choose their own template for developing that school improvement plan. And in St. Louis Public Schools, we know it's the transformation plan that serves as their improvement, continuous improvement tool. Next slide. So here you'll see the basic timeline of MSIP since its inception. We have been in a holding pattern for several years now for MSIP 5. And if you go to the next slide, it will detail why that's the case. In all the little bulleted areas above and below the timeline, you'll see all the activity that's taken place through the course of MSIP 5. Anytime there's been new standards added or a new assessment that's been implemented, it has held us off with APR scores in that particular content area. So you can see that there's been a lot of changes since 2012 when MSIP 5 began. And just recently, well, February of this calendar year, the State Board of Education did approve MSIP 6. But let me talk to you a little bit about MSIP 6 and where we are with that. As you know, the 2020 state assessments were canceled due to the pandemic. Therefore, we have no fall APR. And schools were informed early on that there would not be an annual performance report given for each of the schools. Now DESE's working with old data, and that's going to be an issue. So we're trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward. The soonest that the department will have information coming out on MSIP 6 will be in the spring. There will be 2 specific activities taking place at that time. One, the MSIP standards individually will be piloted sometime around spring or shortly thereafter. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that later. And in addition, there will be a standing ad hoc committee for MSIP 6 metrics, and that will convene in the spring of 2021. So before MSIP 6 is rolled out for the purpose of accrediting and providing support interventions to schools, these things have to take place. The piloting of standards in a given area, as well as determining what the metrics will look like for the APR. The next slide, please. So as a school board of education, governance is a critical and essential element of the CSIP plan. And if you go to the next slide, a couple pieces that I would really like you to focus on is, what is the written evaluation process for your plan? How is it regularly evaluated and updated? That is a typical role for school boards to play. And also the Board of Education utilizes CSIP to monitor progress and the continuous improvement of programs and services. So when I'm thinking about your role as a school board, those are the key areas in which you play a role. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the CSIP serves as that long-range planning tool. Your plan, your CSIP plan is called the Transformation Plan 3.0. And it does meet all of the expectations for the State Department in terms of not only identifying the what, the goals and objectives, but your plan, the Transformation Plan 3.0, certainly details how. What are the strategies that will create the desired outcomes for those goals? The CSIP is the means by which the improvement is going to occur, and there's a regular regional school improvement effort, and we'll talk. I'll share a little bit in how that works and how I've interacted with the district on that. But there's an opportunity for the board to participate in a regional review of progress for your CSIP plan. And by the way, for your information, as an area supervisor, one of 13 in the state, and I serve as a liaison with not only St. Louis Public Schools, but the charter schools in the city of St. Louis. I regularly review district plans, and I also review and give feedback for school improvement, individual school improvement plans. So if we look at the next slide, these are the key components of a thorough, thoughtful, comprehensive school improvement plan. And I won't read them to you, but I think the plan components are what you're most interested in. And I think that for some of the work that you want to do as you consider moving forward, there'll be some options that I'd like to share with you at the end of our presentation when we field some questions. But you can see those are all the basic elements of a good, thorough, thoughtful in the school district further. Next slide. So always make sure that the comprehensive school improvement plan contains a method for regional school improvement. So who is the team? What constitutes a team that will regularly review progress on a plan? For a district plan, that would be a district team. A board member could certainly be considered as a member of that team, but also in the work that most schools do, superintendent provides regular reports on the progress of that school. You have the planning process that's outlined. The data is important because not only are you looking at the quantitative data, which includes everything from academic progress of students, but it also would include survey data, the qualitative. How do you get information from surveying your students, your faculty and staff, and your parents? What kind of information can they provide that will be helpful in determining or refining your goals and objectives, but also to share in a progress report on how your goals are being implemented, the strategies by which they are implemented. Currently under MSIP 5, the 4 key areas that each school is asked to consider for inclusion in their plan focuses on leadership, collaborative cultures, which is climate related, curriculum and assessment, and effective instruction. With MSIP 6, this will change a little bit. Leadership will remain. Then the second strand will be effective teaching and learning. The third strand will be collaborative climate and culture. A fourth strand will be data-based decision-making. Number 5 will be alignment of standards, curriculum and assessment. And number 6, equity and access. It's important to note that MSIP 6 was developed with statewide input from a variety of groups, including parents, teachers, associations from across the entire state over a very lengthy period of time. These key strands surfaced as the primary areas that a school district should cover in their own comprehensive plan, and in your case, the transformation plan. Within each of those strands, there are a number of standards and indicators. The standards are what is expected for a school in a school district to achieve, and the indicators will help a school describe more of the how they will get there. What are the details? What are the specifics, the look fors that would give information not only to you as a board, to your community, but to the department as how they're making progress on a given standard. The metrics committee that I referred to earlier will need to address the indicators and assign a quantitative value or a qualitative value to all of the indicators within all of those areas. And I would ask, as I usually do, to have St. Louis Public Schools represented on such a committee. Your voice really matters. Next slide. And I think I will turn this over. I don't know if you want to pause for questions. I think we'll wait to the end for questions. Dr. Adams?
Yes, I think that's appropriate. Yes, I think that's appropriate. So this slide really provides a crosswalk between the St. Louis Public School Transformation Plan and the Comprehensive School Improvement Plan. Transformation Plan 3.0 was put in place in March 2018 with some 50 staff persons, parents engaged together to come up with the rudiments, if you will, of the plan. And so you can see what the alignment is in terms of the academic achievement, subgroup achievement, college and career. And again, I won't read to you, but the crosswalk simply is the transformation plan aligned to the kinds of things that Dr. Clancy May just indicated. The next slide talks about 2.0, and I'll spend a little time here. And as you know, the district was fully accredited in 2017, and so we thought it was the appropriate time then to revision Transformation Plan 2.0. And basically what we tried to do is to determine what actually happened as a result of Transformation Plan 2.0. The items in red indicate what data that we gleaned from what we were trying to achieve in Transformation Plan 2.0, looking at the indicators that you see on the left-hand side. We shifted to Transformation Plan 3.0. As I said before, this is a transformation plan that is supposed to last for 3 years, from 2018 to 2021. One of the reasons why the board president wanted to have a conversation, because she saw that the plan was ending, or likely ending in 2021, and I think that Dr. Clancy May will speak to the board relative to what their options might be as it relates to that, in light of the fact that we are in a pandemic. But you can see that we added another indicator to Transformation Plan 2.0, and those are the things that you see in red. Dr. Clancy May framed this notion of equity, which is going to be an MSIP 6, and so we thought it would be germane to add it to our plan, because we knew that it was coming down the pike as it relates to what the state was looking to do. We were on several committees as they were talking about this, so we have some preliminary indication that that would be the case, and that's why you see equity added to the particular plan. But these are the goals for the Transformation Plan 3.0. This particular slide simply indicates on the left-hand side what the MSIP 6 is, what our goals are aligned to that, and what the school improvement plan would be in terms of those indicators that that schools would have to produce to show what's actually happening in their school, that would be aligned to our transformation plan and therefore aligned to the MSIP. And you can see the indicators on the right-hand side. Now, this is not all encompassing. These are just some highlighted indicators that are part of the school improvement plan that we will be looking at to determine if it's aligned to the transformation plan and obviously MSIP. The next slide really talks about progress monitoring. I think you received something in the first email that laid out the monitoring as it relates to 2.0. You can see the difference between the monitoring process. As a matter of fact, that monitoring process for me starts tomorrow with network superintendents coming in, reviewing what schools are actually doing. We have an hour presentation by the network superintendents that will provide us the indicators, the information from schools. But basically what we are doing is tracking goals, the action steps, the KPIs or the metrics that align to it, and a timeline. Now, I need to indicate that since the pandemic in March of 2020, we have not spent a great deal of time monitoring the transformation plan. Our focus, as you know, has been really germane to trying to get kids back in school. But after the first quarter ended last week, we are now putting a process in place to go back and to start doing the kind of meetings that we had before to make sure that the alignment is there with Transformation Plan 3.0. I think it's yours at this time, Clancy, Dr. Clancy May.
Let me paint the picture. So MSIP, whether it's MSIP 5 and we'll be rolling into MSIP 6, it sets first of all strands, key strands by which standards are then developed. The standards are the expectations the department has for each and every school district, every charter LEA. Within each standard, there's a series of indicators that further delineate what that standard means, what the look-fors are. It gives a better description and a variety of descriptions. And from that, there will be metrics created that will then be sent out to schools so they understand what their annual performance report will be based on. That's the process that we will be moving forward. It's, again, very important for SLPS, being one of the larger school systems in our state, to always have a place to have their voice at the table. So I have always encouraged Dr. Adams to have representation, and I would continue to that and remind folks to submit names for staff to sit on the metrics. And then also, as a board, a conversation you may wish to have with your leadership in the district is, would you be interested in piloting an MSIP MSIP strand, one strand, in any of those 6 areas that I shared? Leadership, effective teaching and learning, collaborative culture and climate, database decision-making, alignment of standards, curriculum and assessment, and equity and access. Once those pilot periods are finished, then any minor adjustments will be made, and then it will be rolled out in trainings for all the districts and LEAs across the state. I have sent Dr. Adams the full State Board of Education report on MSIP 6 that was presented and approved in February, so that you all can get better acquainted with this new iteration that comes about. In this last page, I also want to assure you that the department works with individual school systems to look for alignment. So we take the MSIP standards, we look to see how they are addressed in your district's transformation plan. And then not only that, but we want to make sure that every school improvement plan is further aligned to the district's plan and then to the state standards. And that's something I do every year during the summer. And I work closely with the school leadership and the building principals. And we've had a very smooth, effective process by which we review and move forward with individual and district plans. So it's been a really great partnership, and the department has appreciated being a thought partner and a collaborator with the district on developing and implementing their improvement plans at the school and at the district level. Dr. Adams mentioned some options to consider. So this is, I guess, the question part before we lead into questions. Right now, it's a challenging time for your district, as it is for all schools across the state with this pandemic that we're in. So districts have options to think about. You can wait for MSIP 6, which your comprehensive improvement plan, your transformation plan will ultimately need to be aligned. Yes, sir? I didn't know if you were saying anything.
No.
Okay, so a district could certainly wait for MSIP 6 to be fully rolled out. I don't believe there will be any changes to the strands or to the standards. You could do a total revision of your transformation plan right now, but know that the indicators could still undergo some tweaking, in which case you would have to go back and revisit that. Or you can consider moving forward with certain parts of your revisions as you move your plan forward. Your plan always rolls forward. And what I mean by that is it certainly would be appropriate right now to consider revisiting your vision and mission for the school, for the district. You could certainly work on setting your goals for finance. A very common place for school districts to address in the financial realm is, for example, fund balances, and also instructional resources. And what I mean by that is right now we're all swimming in the sea of distance learning. And so you could look at how our finances support these instructional resources in this virtual world that we're in, or a hybrid world that we're in. I know that your district, like many, are very concerned about the social emotional learning, welfare of your students and families and teachers. And your district is certainly not the only district that has ever considered right sizing. If you're not familiar with that term, it's a term that school districts often use to adjust the size of the number of schools they have to have better impact on the resources of your school system so that they can address the instructional program. And I know from following along with your board meetings in the past that you have certainly moved and studied the issue of right sizing your school district. So those are all viable things for you to think about if you would want to address the financial goals, and certainly could do that now. So there's lots of things. I know that you have done your due diligence in making sure that your transformation plan is aligned with the goals set by the superintendent or for the superintendent with the superintendent. And that's very helpful because they should all be aligned. But so you do have options to consider, and how you go forward is certainly your call. And we're here to help in any way we can. But I believe that in this time of the pandemic, there's probably a incremental way to move forward that would certainly put you in good place as you prepare for MSIP 6. And we see what changes may still come about. Questions about anything that I've shared?
Thank you, Dr. Clancy May. Does the board have any questions that I can direct? I think she can listen to us.
When is MSIP 6 supposed to roll out, the final version?
Final version of MSIP 6, when will it roll out, Dr. Clancy May?
I don't see it rolling out till at the earliest next school year, because again, we're looking for districts to volunteer to pilot a particular strand and standards. And we're also looking for a statewide committee to determine the metrics by which the APRs will be developed. That's going to take time. So at the earliest, it would be sometime in the next school year, and that might even be soon, too soon.
Dr. Roberts, I see that you have a question. Dr. Roberts, I see that you have a question.
My question is for you, Dr. Adams. Do we have representation on these various committees?
We have had representation in the past. Once the new committees are put in place, as Dr. Clancy May has indicated, she will invite us. The state will make a selection. Ms. Van Oy has been on one of the committees. Dr. Knight has been on committees as well. But yes, we have had representation in the past and hope to continue having representation.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy May, for this presentation. So I'm hearing you say that there's a request for districts to pilot the MSIP 6 strands. Would that be something we could do? So kind of combining that idea with rolling forward the previous transformation plan, could we kind of roll that forward and then potentially pilot, one of the strands that you're looking at for MSIP 6?
Dr. Adams, if you could repeat that, I didn't quite catch it.
So the question was, you talked about piloting a standard. Is it possible to pilot a standard simultaneously as you are upgrading or updating the transformation plan?
Yes, it's possible. You could certainly pilot a leadership strand, for example, while you're working on another area, finance or equity. Leadership, for information, leadership contains both governance, school board governance, as well as district leadership. But yes, you could certainly pilot one while you're working on another. Or you could pilot and try to work on the same one at the same time. And if you're interested in piloting, I'm certain you'll have that conversation with your superintendent, and then he can let me know. I don't want to have you miss an opportunity if that's something you'd like to do.
Mr. Lang?
So you mentioned the fact that there's no fall APR data that's, I guess, slowing down the progress of MSIP 6. My question is from, I guess, 2012 to now, what is the MSIP 5 data looking like from districts that has been collected already? Like, what's the overall judgments on MSIP 5?
So the question was, what's the overall judgment on MSIP 5 since there's no recent data from testing? Am I correct, Mr. Lane?
Right, but knowing that it started in 2012.
Knowing that it started in 2012. So what does the history of MSIP say to the state relative to the testing component or the APR component?
I'm not sure if I'm hearing the question correctly, but you're asking what the data goes into the APR.
Now, what does the historical data from 2012 indicate to the state relative to how districts are doing across the state based on MSIP?
Five.
MSIP 5, based on MSIP 5.
So the State Department puts out their own report of progress on the APR, or at least I should say it, that they put out annual data on students' performance across the state. They don't publicly put out comparisons from one district to another, but they do put out data that shows how students are performing on the state assessment, both grade level assessments and just as an aside, typically the state looks at the previous 3 years of data, and that's where we're experiencing a glitch right now because we don't have 2020 data. So I think that's the conversation that the department is wrestling with now, is if you're trying to use the 3 previous years of data, and you're missing how do you move forward? So there's more to conversation. I don't believe that probably answered your question. So if you want to re-ask it another way, I'll give it another shot.
Maybe let me see if I could clarify just a little bit, and Mr. Lang can correct me if I'm wrong.
I can rephrase.
Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, if I'm going to rephrase it, I'll do it this way. Based on since we won't compare, based on SLPS's performance in the past on MSIP 5, what would be your projections for how SLPS could perform on MSIP 6?
Did you hear the question?
No, I can't hear.
So based upon SLPS performance in the past, how do you predict, or can you predict, or how do you predict they will do on MSIP 6, based on historical data of St. Louis Public School District?
Well, I think the prediction is going to be a challenge. I do think you have your own formative data that you currently use. Most and LEAs do have formative data, which does tell a story about growth. And I know there's been a lot of discussion around the state about looking at assessment data in terms of individual student growth and the impact that has. So I think you can make predictions based on formative data, which I believe you do. I think that once schools become more familiar with the strands and the standards and indicators, I think that will help with their input to the state on what should be considered. But I think right now we rely on districts knowing their students, knowing their assessments, seeing and looking and analyzing the longitudinal data that they get on cohort groups as well as individuals. And they're able to do a very nice job, I think a very pretty spot on job of predicting student success.
Thank you.
We take a lot of stock in formative data as well, even though right now there hasn't been a place for that formative data in the APR.
Dr. Roberts?
I'd just like to follow up on that. Did I hear that there's we're leaning toward a growth model or a value-added component around student achievement?
So is the board hearing that we are leaning toward a growth model or value-added model around
A
student
lot of
achievement?
schools are studying growth models. The department has been wrestling with that. We're not there yet. And I know that that's going to be an ongoing topic of conversation, discussion. I think the concern is the comparability from one. I mean, first of all, the state needs the comparability measures. And if districts are using different formative tests in a growth model, it would be very difficult or impossible for the state to compare that information when they're using different assessment tools. So I know that that's an ongoing dialogue. I know in the St. Louis region, there's a group of educators that are on their own ad hoc committee, and they report regularly out to all the constituents in the St. Louis region on progress. But I think that's one of the key issues that's been a challenge for the department. And so we're not there yet. I think department will recognize that the growth model is an important one. It's just trying to figure out the metrics around that so that you have some uniformity with the assessment tool used from one district to the next. Does that make sense?
Well, let me just follow up then. If every school district is taking a state assessment, that can't serve as a baseline versus each school district giving a formative assessment to establish a growth model or value added?
If each school district is taking the same assessment, the state assessment, can't that serve as a baseline to a formative assessment around a growth model or value
Each
added?
district was using the same formative assessment?
State assessment.
State assessment.
State assessment.
State assessment.
It's the state assessment
Well-
that gives us our APR.
Yes, but I know that there's a lot more to it. And I think that the door is open for that, but I think there's a lot more detail that I'm not the best person to respond to. I think that's what we have all of our data specialists in the department that probably could weigh in, and probably Ms. Van Oy could weigh in a little bit on that as well. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a push for growth model. I'm not sure how, the department hasn't seen anybody submit a recommendation yet that could possibly work. And I know that the commissioner is open to any plan that could be submitted that would delineate what that would look like, how that would work. There's been nothing submitted to the department as of yet.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Dr. Clancy May?
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Dr. Clancy May?
Well, not Dr. Clancy, but just so we can all understand, what are we talking about when we say a broke model? I'm Googling it, but I still don't know what we're talking about.
Could you explain growth model to the
Ms.
board,
Van Oy
Dr.
probably
Clancy
could
May?
do a better job of it than I can.
I think Ms. Van Oy
She
probably
deals
could
with
do a
the
better
data
job
on
of
a
it
regular
than I
basis.
can.
Can she, do you mind if
She deals with
give
the
it a shot?
data on a regular basis. Do you mind if she give it a shot?
Not at all.
So remember last month when we had the STAR assessment that Dr. Knight and I talked about? We talked a lot about growth projectile in the STAR data. It's a comparison of the same students from the previous year and how each student did individually. The problem is we only have annual assessments in ELA and math. With science, we only give it in 5th grade and then 8th grade, so it's hard to show an annual growth model when you only give the assessment every 3 years.
So you're saying growth, not
Growth.
broke, huh?
G-R-O-W,
Oh, okay.
growth.
That was my misunderstanding. I kept hearing broke.
No.
You're saying growth. Okay.
Growth model.
Never mind.
Okay.
Could I just say one last thing? I
Yes,
know
ma'am.
you may be eager to move forward. I really think, and I know that Dr. Adams really spelled out a very thoughtful monitoring, a couple slides on monitoring. I think that's typically the most important role a board plays, is how you monitor progress on the goals. And there's lots of conversation that you have on, what is it? What are you looking at? Is there clarity and uniformity on how you interpret the goals and the objectives? And is everybody clear on the look-fors? And I think that alone is a lot for the board to take responsibility for. It's not the only thing, but it is a really key piece. Oftentimes we will see school systems that are struggling because they've lost sight of their CSIP plan, their goals, and they have not developed a system for progress monitoring. Can't stress that enough. It's really a critical role, or one of the many critical roles that a board member plays, is how they monitor progress, join in on the conversation with the leadership of the school, and make certain that feedback is provided.
I want to say thank you very much. I know the board gives their thanks as well for your presentation tonight, and I'm sure there'll be some follow-up from the board president to you relative to what the next steps might be after some coordination with administration. So thank you very much, Dr. Clancy May, for your presentation tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome.
At this point in time, there's a presentation that is in your packet again. Again, you received an electronic copy as I met with the board president on last Tuesday, Wednesday, in review of this document. At least as we discussed it, I indicated that this was a draft and there would be a hard copy coming, and that's what's in your packet. So I ask that you refer to the hard packet. So this is a draft document. Obviously, it will be tweaked after this meeting and tweaked again prior to the board meeting that is coming up in November. The district leadership remains steadfastly committed to fulfilling the district's vision and mission, upholding the district's core beliefs. Obviously, the board is doing some work right now on mission and vision and achieving our current Transformation Plan 3.0, which we just discussed at length. At the same time, St. Louis public leadership and the public at large are recognizing opportunities to reallocate district assets to more effectively achieve mission and vision, consistent with the core beliefs of the district and current transformation plan. Tonight, I want to identify how stakeholders are helping to shape our plans around school consolidation and invite your input as a board into this matter. As you are aware, the board allowed Emerging Wisdom to have a series of meetings starting in February of last year and March, and obviously the pandemic occurred and we stopped with the final recommendation that might be coming. And so at this point in time, what I'm engaging the board to do again, as we indicated in July after the presentation, that we will come back to have this conversation. The pre-pandemic review, building on your recommendations from the community visioning workshop, and when I say your, I'm talking about the public. And so we want to spend some time right now really kind of reviewing what was said already and kind of basically giving you some review of that information in case the public has forgotten or the board has as well. Just before the pandemic, a series of community visioning workshops invited participants to, number one, learn about the current and evolving state of St. Louis Public School by, number one, envisioning a system of excellent schools, identifying the top priorities to guide the district's transformational efforts, again, a link back to the transformation plan, and lastly, reflect on the district criteria for school closure and consolidation decisions. As a recap, I'd like to kind of recap what was said. With regard to the first item, envisioning an excellent school system, you can see that stakeholders prioritize these facets of our work: highly qualified staff, improved physical, social, emotional environment, enhanced culturally responsive curricula, and engaged parents and families, and lastly, equitable practices. This came from the presentation from the community visioning sessions that occurred, and this comes directly from the presentation you received from Emerging Wisdom. Secondly, community articulated their top priorities for guiding transformational efforts. Again, this came from that particular group: improving teacher quality and retention through better pay, benefits, and professional development. 92% of persons said that. Increased support and services, 68% of persons said that. Enhanced school curriculum, 60%. Strengthening parent and family involvement and support, 56%. Investing more in the neighborhood schools, 56%. Deepening policies around advocacy efforts, 52%. And cultivate strong school leadership. The top three were improving teacher quality, increasing student support services, and enhancing the school curriculum. Now, the item that was not discussed, as I said before, tonight we will focus our attention on the third objective, which is the criteria for school consolidation. Should be noted that the pandemic really has highlighted some various inequities and systematic challenges in our pre-pandemic model. Many of these challenges were on our radar and were long-term goals in our transformation plan. However, we were forced to address them sooner as a result of the pandemic. What are those? Number one, one-to-one technology for students and teachers, more equitable distribution of technology in schools, standard-based lesson planning, as you heard from Dr. Knight and her team 2 meetings ago, and better integration of technology in the classroom. As educators, we have learned a lot during the pandemic. Perhaps the greatest lesson learned is that we cannot not afford to get back to normal. We have to take what we have learned and use it to keep momentum going. In addition, we know we can improve through a more strategic and optimal allocation of existing resources, and that's what the conversation tonight is about. And right-sizing the district is a critical component of that process, as the board has already agreed as a result of the community visioning process. So, question number 2 is the need for consolidation. I want to set the context for tonight's conversation by describing some of the many phenomena at work within the landscape of the district work. First of all, I'd like to give kudos to Forward to Ferguson that did a great presentation that's about 5 or 6 minutes long that I'd like you to engage with tonight. In order to do that, I'd like to take about 6 minutes to borrow from a metaphor that emerged from the work of Forward to Ferguson, as I indicated before, and so we're going to show this particular presentation tonight.
Educators, advocates, and policymakers have been trying to close these gaps. We, both people and resources, remain highly sensitive. 78% of public school students in English districts attend a racially competent school. More than 75% of students in schools are race. The damage segregation of generations ago still affects schools downstream today. Wealthy majority white schools enjoy a historic and continued strong local resources, where students and teachers generally get what they need. While minority black schools, resources are limited, and students and teachers are asked to do more of the class. The legacy of segregation also means that these students arrive at school. In majority black districts, an average of 94% of students leave by March. In the majority white districts, it's just 29%. Students who are underqualified are greatly reduced by March, even more reduced, not less. Now, this metaphor is important, no metaphor is, but it does help us see key systemic factors that impact education outcomes. For too long, we tried to produce better outcomes for black and brown students by focusing only on the top downstream. That's like looking at the two riverbeds to understand what the northern mountain history or power without ever looking upstream. Even worse, conversations only on outcomes without recognizing the drive reinforce the toxic narrative of black kids who don't work as hard, who don't have as much faith, and black parents who don't care as much. But these gaps represent our collective. And this big flame cloaks the root causes of our racial inequity and helps perpetuate an education system built on unequal funding structures. If we want to change our outcomes, if we believe all children deserve an equal opportunity to thrive, we need to engage with the sources of the outcomes. We have to change the conversation. We have to shift our focus. We have to go upstream. That's the goal of CSIP, a new project for you.
So I think the PowerPoint, the presentation gives a good indication of why there is a disparity between what happens in a county and what happens in the city, and that is a funding stream coming in. But this board has the ability to control the resources going out. And so part of the conversation tonight is what the board can control. Yes, there needs to be an advocacy effort that's continuously around equal funding from this board, from this community, around the resources that each district gets to make sure that there is not such a thing as separate but unequal. But at the same time that that's going on simultaneously, the conversation that we're having tonight is a conversation around resources, around what goes out and what the board can control in light of the dynamics that are before us. If you look at these two districts, the tale of two rivers by the numbers. St. Louis Public Schools and charters, unlike any other state, city in the country, the state, Kansas City and St. Louis has to deal with the notion of charters as well. And so any conversation with you around schooling also has to be a conversation around charter schools. If the story of our region is the story of two rivers of public education, ours is surely a part of the Northern River from the video. As you can see from the graph that's right before us, the demographic makeup of students within our system is comprised primarily of students of color. If you look on the left-hand side, you see St. Louis Public School District, Hazelwood, and Ferguson, all with minority populations. And on the right-hand side, which would be the Northern River in this particular case, minority populations that are the minority in their districts. And that would be Kirkwood, MRH, which is Maplewood, Richmond Heights, Rittner, and Webster Grove. So, to delve further into this conversation, within the confines of our river, meaning the St. Louis Public School District, or the city of St. Louis, the district additional phenomena are straining resources. Number one, if you look at the city's population, between 2010 and 2018, the overall population of St. Louis City decreased by 5.2%, a rate of negative 0.7 per year. Between 2007 and 2018, the population of school-aged children ages 5 to 19 decreased by 18.6% at a rate of about negative 2.3% per year. At one of our meetings, I want to say it was the last meeting or the meeting before last, Mrs. Jones asked me about data relative to students who have left the district. It should be interesting to note when we looked at the data, there were about 2,300 students last year who left the district. 48% of that number, over 1,000, left the city of St. Louis. Only about 18% went to charter schools, only about 300 kids. So our overall number that supports the notion of having too many, the population declining, is the most recent data that we were able to pull just from this particular school year, that yes, students are leaving the city of St. Louis. Some would say in droves, but the data speaks to the fact that almost half the students who left the St. Louis Public School District left the city of St. Louis totally. And so this is the data that I just spoke to. Next slide. While populations decrease, the supply of schools is increasing. This is a startling piece of data just so that you can see it. And you can't see the picture well, you have a copy of it. In the meantime, the gradual addition of charter schools to the system draws resources from an already depleted river. In 2000, where 103 public schools once served 60,000 students, in 2007 and 8, I arrived as superintendent in 2008, there were about 103 public schools, that's counting charters and district schools, serving about 60,642 students, which is about 589 students per school. In the year 1920, which is last year, there are 110 public schools. That means there are more public schools in 1920 than there were when I arrived in 2008, serving 15,000 less students. So more schools, less students. More schools, less students. Fewer students and more buildings is what you see at the bottom here. And that is the reality of what has happened over the last 10 years. Within the district, these patterns have yielded schools with smaller enrollments, further straining resources. If you look at the data, elementary, middle, and high schools, you can see that the desired school size for elementary will be anywhere from 350 to 600, for middle, 450 to 800, high school, 700 to 120. We have 40 elementary schools that are below that number. We have 11 middle schools that are below that number, and so this is the total number of schools. If you look at the district schools that are below that number, you can see it in the middle in red. The suboptimal allocation to students, 32 schools below, 5 middle schools below, 12 high schools below. Within the range that would be optimal allocation of students, there are 20 schools, 4 and 1. Some are approaching, some are above. But the bottom line that we need to understand here is that in red are the number of schools that are below the optimal number. And this would include charter schools as well as public schools, because as I said before, we can't separate the two out that way at this point in time. If you look at individual seats, because you always hear this conversation around seats, quality seats. Overall, this results in a district that is that has a 43% empty seat number. 43% of our seats are empty. If you count 100%, 57% are filled, but about 43% are empty, meaning empty buildings, empty classrooms, empty corridors. Overall, the results in a district that is flush with empty seats to the tune, as I said before, 43%. The seat capacity is calculated using 95% base utilization factor for all facilities. No current system exists to gather data on building capacity for charter schools. This is just the St. Louis Public School District in this case. As we talked about some additional information that we were able to gather, based on interviews with St. Louis researchers and leaders, including leadership from the Federal Reserve Bank, and this came second party. We did not actually get this data. We got it from another report. The St. Louis City and the county school-age population is projected at best to remain stagnant through 2030. So for the next 10 years or so, the population is likely to be stable, although I just indicated that persons are leaving outside the, city, the district or the city, but persons are moving in. But it will remain stagnant is what the prediction is right now. According to the same report, there are 51 more schools than needed in St. Louis City. That includes charters as well as the district schools. Our context is changing. The question becomes, how are we? Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world, a quote from Nelson Mandela. So I think there's some great opportunities here as we look at our resources and how to better align those resources. So the notion of consolidation and listening to our community, as I mentioned from the start, a cursory reading of the tea leaves, a cursory reading reveals that consolidations within the district are inevitable. Our stakeholders anticipate this, and they provided us with insights basically from the community visioning last year. Community was asked whether they agree or disagree with the district's 5 criteria. If you remember, these were the 5 criteria that I shared with the board and that we share: academic performance, feeder patterns, building conditions, citywide development, and capacity. Those were the criteria that we indicated last year. This question was asked: do you agree with the criteria that the district has used to inform its school closure and consolidation decision? You can see in red what people said about academic performance. 96% said no, it wasn't a good indicator. For feeder patterns, 64% said it wasn't a good indicator. For building condition, 48% said no. Citywide development, 32%. And capacity, 28% said no, they would disagree with those being the indicators. So key takeaways from the visioning workshop. Number 1, academic performance. They indicated multiple variables impact performance: teacher quality, family environment, district systems of choices like magnet schools or choice schools, feeder patterns, district systems of choice, undermine the feeder patterns and influence performance, and building conditions, deferred maintenance, and practices of neglect has exacerbated poor conditions. So what they're basically saying is their rationale for disagreeing, they have laid out here why they disagree with the rationale. Additional recommendations on school closures. The community said apply a racial equity lens to closure criteria. Number 2, focus most on what students and families want. And lastly, weigh factors in order of importance and communicate transparency. This is what the community said, and so these are the kinds of things that I'll be talking about a little bit further. Other stakeholders said the following: in addition to the input provided by the community stakeholders at the community vision process, other individuals have volunteered their own perspectives represented in the above data, and these were online documentation that we received, and you can see what the percentages say here. SLPS must share power with those impacted by the closures. SLPS should conduct an equity impact analysis as part of its closure decision. SLPS should hire community engagement staff to assist families with closures from the community, and SLPS school board create formal policies making roles for community members impacted by closure, and SLPS should acknowledge racism and creating conditions that lead to school closure. And quite frankly, this came from the We Power group. These were some comments that came from We Power that we incorporated in what we reviewed because we looked at everything that was out there. Administrators also weighed in, and this is a really poignant piece that I want to share with the board. We have had the conversation around school closure on a number of different occasions, but past stall efforts at consolidation find schools that previously made the list. If we create a list, it has a self-fulfilling prophecy. What it does automatically is put that school on the list in the neighborhood, and that school starts to decline almost overnight. And so prior to me making any kind of list and bringing it back to the board, I need to make sure that if we are going down this road, the board must commit that if they set the criteria, that we critically review the criteria and make decisions around the criteria. We can't, I am not interested in putting a name of a school in the public arena and for that school at some point in time for us to play volleyball with the school going back and forth about what it's going to do or what it's not going to do. So the administration is incredibly serious about this effort, and I believe the board is as well, but I don't want to go down this road unless the board is committed to, once we establish the criteria, to determine if schools are going to be looked at. Whatever actions the district takes, we will mitigate the negative impact by doing the following. Provide timely, transparent, and honest communication. You can see the upside down triangle. Develop a plan for closed schools. Ensure closure leads to better education for all, one of the things that the board has talked about, and facilitate a smooth transition for all. Part of that requires us to be timely and making decisions. So as we reflect on the community stakeholder input, we want to get to really the crux of the conversation tonight. As a result of our discernment process, the district recommends the following. These are the indicators you see on the left-hand side: academic performance, feeder patterns, building conditions, citywide development capacity. After listening to the community and looking at all of the data, we are recommending the following. Enrollment demand, building conditions which is already there, capacity which is already there, potential for neighborhood collaboration, not just citywide development, but what's the potential, and lastly, other special programs. So on the left-hand side are the things that we initially said when we started this conversation in February. On the right-hand side is what we've come to as a result of listening to the community, listening to everyone. Part of what this board's challenge will be is to accept what these criteria might be and then to come up with weights as it relates to what that weight might be. My staff has already looked at some of these things, but I need the board to weigh in tonight or at a subsequent meeting to discuss this. One of the things that we are committed to, which is our guiding principles, at least as I look at this, listening to the board and listening to the community, students will experience an improved learning environment as a result of our actions. I remember clearly Mr. Lang saying this multiple times. And so in your packet, you have a document that is called the upgrade rule. In that document, it lays out what needs to happen for students to have an upgraded experience prior to them if schools close. And it lays out clearly what our responsibilities are. What's not in this document are other upgrades that need to take place that the district needs to put in place, like full-time nurses, full-time social workers, full-time counselors, AP courses, calculus courses, other kinds of upgrades that need to take place from a district level. That is not, it is impossible to give that to you tonight because we have not determined if we are going to look to close schools and how many we might be talking about, such that resources might be aligned to that purpose. But that is part of this conversation with the board. But the document you have lays out in a very detailed way what another district has done in terms of upgrading opportunities for kids, such that kids get the first shot at getting into another kind of school, a school that they need to get into. So as we talk about consolidation, we're not talking about just the building here, because I know that's one of the overarching pieces here, but how do we make sure that kids are in a better position? And also the district has additional resources to support them. Whenever possible, school buildings will be repurposed for community use. What I provided to you is a document from Chicago Public School District, CPS. There's a document in your packet that if we make this commitment, we also have to make a commitment about having an advisory committee that not only works with the district about repurposing schools, but selling schools and leasing schools and doing all of those kinds of things that we have historically not done a good job of doing. That might be an outside group that does that with us, but at the end of the day, this can't be a 6-month process. It has to be a long-term process. In Chicago, they closed 50 schools. That advisory committee is still in place as they talk about what they need to do around schools. And I think they closed those schools in 2014-15. So it is an effort that must continue long-term if we go down this particular road. The first two are real commitments that have to be made by administration and the board to do that. It will take additional resources to do that, but those are key components. We will review all consolidation efforts through the lens of equity. Obviously, that's the neighborhood component that we've talked about. How do we make sure that black and brown kids, or kids that have the greatest need, are getting the greatest services? That is a challenge for the community, a challenge for us, and a challenge for the board to insist that the administration is held accountable around that particular principle. And lastly, we will continue to offer opportunities for community input and make adjustments where necessary. When we talk about consolidation, I don't see from my lens that the consolidation is a one-year effort. This is, if you go back to the front of the presentation, it says SLP is school consolidation considerations for the 2021 and beyond. So it's more than just 2021. This is an effort that will likely be a multi-year effort around this piece. This says, please weigh in. We started with a set of 5 criteria. We listened to the community and adjusted. Now my question is, what do you think as a board? Your input is critical to this effort. Your feedback is obviously guiding as we look to what needs to happen. I want to cover a couple of slides and then obviously open this conversation up to the board for feedback, questions, or concerns. Planning for next steps. As I look at the next steps, prioritizing, strategizing, and plan the next steps, finalize an acceptance of the new criteria at the November 10th board meeting, presentation of the school consolidation plan, including school names, to the board on the 17th of November. I think the board president laid out some steps for you as well, and I'm aligning this recommendation to those steps. Community input from November the 18th to December 4th. Multifaceted ways that we get the community input, since we can't have them in front of us like we would normally do. And then for the board to vote on the school consolidation plan either at the 8th board meeting or a special meeting on the 15th. Those would be my recommendations at this point in time. I'd like to just leave, as we move forward, our stakeholders remind us to do the following. Develop a transition plan to seek feedback. This again came from the emerging wisdom work. Advance accountability and equity, meaning push it forward. Undertake phased closures, not all in one year. And maintain stewardship of closed buildings, which means that we have to take care of them. We have to make sure that they are not eyesores to the communities to the degree that we can. The challenge for us, I think, is a real challenge around a strong partner in Chicago Public School District. The city partnered with the district in this effort, and so it would be incumbent upon us to insist that there is some involvement at the city level, and the city has been engaged with us through their community development arm at this point in time. Lastly, you will either step forward into the growth or you will step back into safety. Maslow said this, and I think we have some real challenges here to kind of think about the video you saw around still unequal video, still unequal, separate but unequal. The challenge, I think, is a challenge around the board leaning into coming up with a recommendation to the superintendent and administration such that we can make a recommendation to the community as it relates to the criteria, as it relates to the weighted factor. We have some suggestions for that, but we wanted to give the board the first opportunity for this conversation before we came back on November the 10th. Lastly, for those persons, and I know Ms. Fowler wasn't part of the board at this point in time, these were the 6 community workshops that took place across the city. You can see what the numbers were, 657 persons over I think a 2 or 3 week period of time, and you can see what the numbers were at each one of these workshops and presentations. So at this point in time, I will close my mouth and give the board an opportunity for questions or discussion.